Olá, sejam muito bem-vindos a mais uma especialíssima live do Brasil Fantasy Football BRFF, o seu canal de fantasy no Brasil, no YouTube, nas redes sociais, nos agregadores de podcasts, em todo lugar. Eu sou André Amaral e hoje temos o privilégio de receber pela segunda vez um dos maiores nomes da indústria do fantasy football em todo o planeta. Ele que é o editor-chefe do assunto lá no maior portal esportivo do Canadá, o The Score, além de comissário e organizador da nossa tão comentada por aqui Copa do Mundo Dynasty, em que o BRFF, representando o Brasil, foi campeão na temporada inaugural ano passado. Diretamente de Toronto, chega o nosso amigo Justin Boone. Hi, Justin. Thank you so much for being here with us for the second year in a row, especially after you granted us the honor of participating in your International Dynasty League, which we affectionately nicknamed Dynasty World Cup, with a bunch of huge names and bright minds from the fantasy industry all around the world. We had the luck of claiming the title in year one and hope to chase the glory once again before our elderly squad retire all at once. Anyway, welcome back to the show, and please tell us if we can get a discount in Tyreek Hill, who was the subject of major negotiations between our teams just weeks ago. Welcome back, Justin.
Well, thanks for having me. I've really enjoyed that Dynasty League, and maybe I should regret inviting you guys after you ended up coming through and winning the title last year and making my life pretty tough in the international division that we're in. That division had a lot of talented squads last year. I think it was 4 or 5 of the 6 teams were right in the mix. So it's a really fun league. And as far as Tyreek Hill goes, I don't know. When we were talking, I think people were a little more down on him. And then training camp, the preseason came along. The last few weeks, there's been a lot of buzz around Tyreek and that connection with Tua. So I think the price is going up now, gentlemen.
He's not cheaper, just price going up. Okay, let's see what we can do. Well, before we start with the fantasy football questions, Justin, I'll just send some messages in Portuguese and introduce my fellow colleague here so he can say his greetings to you and those watching us, okay?
Absolutely.
Bom, galera, então convidar vocês aí que estiverem de olho a participar no chat com perguntas, comentários, cornetadas, o que vocês quiserem, principalmente estratégias aí para os drafts que se aproximam para o nosso mestre Justin Boone. E o Lord Dérick aqui vai fazer a nossa tradução simultânea, se vocês quiserem mandar essas perguntas em português, inclusive. Curtam o vídeo, acionem o sininho, se inscrevam no canal, sigam a gente nos agregadores de podcasts e deixem aquela avaliação de 5 estrelas onde isso é possível e chequem nossos planos de assinatura e o Draft Guide lá no site do BRFF, porque estamos com preços promocionais aí. Bora então apresentar meu grande companheiro Lord Dérick Bissiguini, novamente me fazendo companhia nessas lives internacionais. Como é que você está nessa noite? Dá o salve inicial para a galera e para o Justin, por favor, Dérick.
Boa noite, pessoal, tudo bom? Sejam muito bem-vindos. Novamente, quem quiser fazer alguma pergunta em português, no inglês está mais ou menos assim, pode perguntar em português, a gente responde sem problema algum. E é isso aí. Hello, Justin. It's a pleasure to be with you tonight. It's the first time. The last night live, I wasn't here, so it's really a pleasure to be with you, and welcome.
Well, I appreciate you guys having me. Great to finally meet you, and I look forward to talking. You guys sent me some questions. Got a lot of great questions to go over here. And I will say too, off the top, I appreciate you guys doing the switching over to English. I know it's, I don't have enough time to learn Portuguese in the off season, unfortunately, but maybe that should be on my list.
Yeah, maybe someday. So let's start things off because we have a lot of subjects, really nice topics here. I would like to start, Justin, talking about preseason hype and training camp buzz. What stories are you buying into the most between names like, among others, Damian Pierce, Isaiah Pacheco, Romeo Dobbs, George Pickens, Isaiah McKenzie, Isaiah Likely, a lot of Isaiahs around here, not to mention the panic with Antonio Gibson right now, maybe being overtaken by Brian Robinson in Washington and this whole messy situation in the Commanders' backfield. What major moves, if any, have you done to your rankings as a result of all of this training camp and preseason buzz?
Well, my rankings are getting updated constantly. Basically, any free time I have this time of year, I'm sitting in front of the computer and I'm tweaking the rankings and the projections. I think with all the preseason, the off-season stuff, all the buzz that surrounds some of these players, I think the most important thing is we want to see a situation where we're hearing a lot of different sources say the same thing. So whether it's the beat writers, the national writers, other people in the organization, teammates, even fans, you want everything pointing in the same direction. So there's a few of these guys like George Pickens, for example, where some people have gone crazy. It's like people want to put him in the Hall of Fame already, but literally everything we've heard about Pickens has been incredibly positive, all the way down to his teammates like Chase Claypool and Deontay Johnson calling him a freak and saying that he's making all kinds of crazy plays in practice all the time. That tells me that I think there's something there. I think this guy is going to be a star. Now, whether he can do it this year, whether he can carve out enough of a target share to actually put up fantasy relevant numbers this year, I think he can, but it's not guaranteed with the quarterback situation there, with the offensive line not being very good, a bottom 5 offensive line for the Steelers, and with all the target competition that they have, so many great skill position players. So it could be a little difficult for Pickens, but he's definitely someone that, from what we're hearing, I'm buying into him being a star in this league. Now you go through the list. I mean, Dameon Pierce is someone that, all signs are looking really good. I was excited to see him play in the second week. After the first week of the preseason, he came out, looked explosive, put up some good runs. I wanted to see him play in the second week of the preseason. They held him out. And what's that tell you? They know what they know. They don't need to see anymore. They're going to put him out there as their starter in week 1. So that's very exciting. We've already seen his ADP start to creep up quite a bit at this point. We just have to remember in that Houston offense, which I think is going to be maybe better than people expect this year. Their offensive line, they got some pieces to maybe move up and be a middle of the pack offensive line, which would be an upgrade from where they've been in previous seasons. And they got some decent weapons there. I mean, Davis Mills last year, for a 3rd round quarterback to come out and perform the way he did, not a superstar, but to come out and perform adequately and to hold that job for the year, that was pretty impressive. And I think he's going to take a step forward this year. They have Brandon Cooks there, who consistently puts up big points. I mean, Brandon Cooks, 6 of the last 7 seasons has gone over 1,000 yards. This guy gets no respect in the fantasy community. I don't understand that one. And then guys like Nico Collins, Brevin Jordan, some of these sleeper candidates that could step up. So I think that offense is going to be much better. But you look at their situation, are they going to be winning all these games? Are they going to be trailing more often? Probably. You still have Marlon Mack and Rex Burkhead, these veteran backs that will probably work in on passing down, so that could limit some of Pierce's upside. So I just think we have to keep all that stuff in mind. Yes, he looks very explosive. Yes, all signs are pointing to him starting. But if that ADP continues to creep up, at some point, I'm going to be out on him there. But I have moved him up quite a bit. I got to go through. You guys rattled off so many names. Who else do we have? Brian Robinson. So with that one, we knew all offseason, J.D. McKissic, they bring him back to play that passing down role. That wasn't great news for Antonio Gibson. Then you have the Washington go out and they bring in a bunch of prospects at running back for top 30 visits. That was kind of scary for Gibson. And then they actually draft one, and immediately Ron Rivera starts talking about how Brian Robinson is a 1-2 punch with Gibson and all this stuff, and that he could potentially have the goal line work. That's not great if you already have J.D. McKissic taking on some of that passing down work. And then Gibson doesn't do himself any favors, has fumbling issues in training camp, has fumbling issues in the first week of the preseason, starts to get demoted, practicing with the second team, the third teams, the special teams unit. And what do we see in the second preseason game? Brian Robinson starting over him. So once again, this is another one where I want to suggest a little bit of caution, because I don't think Gibson's getting benched entirely. I think we're looking at a 3-man committee. And now I think Brian Robinson is going to be the leader of that committee. He's going to get the valuable goal line touches. That's very exciting for him. He's the guy that's probably going to put up the best fantasy season here, but Gibson's still going to be involved. So I have Robinson moved up. I have him ahead of Gibson just by 1 spot though. RB35, RB36 in my updated rankings that are coming out. And then J.D. McKissic's just sort of a PPR option there. Who else we got? A lot of names on this list. Isaiah McKenzie.
We don't have to go through all of them because
that's my nature. I want to be detailed. I want to make sure to go through. I'm a Bills fan. Let me say Isaiah McKenzie real quick.
McKenzie, please.
Isaiah McKenzie's locked down the starting role in the slot for Buffalo. And we've seen he is a more explosive, more dynamic threat than Cole Beasley was there. It's just a matter of, will he be able to actually carve out the kind of target share that Cole Beasley did? Probably not. There's a lot of good weapons in Buffalo. But still, McKenzie, we saw last year, he had that one monster game when he actually got starter snaps. So the upside is there for him. And really, you're going to want to have pieces of this Buffalo offense this year. It looks like one of the best offenses in the league. We thought that before the preseason. They came out this week. This is not me being a Bills fan and a homer, but they came out this week. They scored touchdowns on their first 6 drives. Josh Allen was basically perfect, 3 for 3, 45 yards and a touchdown, and they looked fantastic. So you want to make sure you're investing in offenses like that, and the Bills are definitely one this year.
Nice. Just sending a shout out to everybody on the chat. Fantasy Futebolista, Guilherme Gianni, our great dear friend, and Victor Zifrid. In a moment, we'll put those questions on the screen. But let's talk now about tight ends, Justin. You have been saying you really like the idea of securing a top-tier player from the position this year. Do you consider Waller and Kittle part of that group, or just the top 3 formed by Kelsey, Andrews, and Pitts? With that said, which of those values do you like the most? Kelsey in the end of round 1, beginning of round 2, Andrews in the mid to late round 2, or Pitts in early round 3?
Kelsey's a little pricey at that 1-2 turn. I do think he's probably worth that pick, but with his age there and, at some point the age cliff's going to come for him. So that worries me just a little bit. You want to be out a year early rather than a year late on that one. So I don't end up with a lot of Kelsey. Andrews, I'll take at the end of the second round. Sometimes he falls to the early third. I like that value for him. He was the number 1 tight end last year in fantasy. He did beat Travis Kelce. So we have to remember that. And the Ravens don't have a ton of other options. They have Rashad Bateman, who I like a lot. Rashad Bateman hasn't really done it yet, but I'm expecting that breakout to come this year. So Andrews is going to be the de facto number 1 receiver in that offense. So I do like him in that range. And Kyle Pitts is the one that I find that I'm getting the most of, because I think this year he is going to have a chance to put up the kind of numbers that'll put him in that elite tier with those other guys. So I'm already kind of considering him there. Last year, only the second tight end ever to put up over 1,000 yards in his rookie season. Just didn't have a lot of touchdowns. Hopefully he can rectify that this year. We really don't know what he could be. This guy could be, one of the top receivers in the league playing the tight end position, which is basically what he is and what we knew he was going to be coming out. So that's very exciting. And you get a little bit of a discount just because he hasn't put together that monster season yet. My overall tight end strategy, though, is this year, based on the way the board is, and I don't want to spoil anything we're going to talk about coming up, but based on the way that ADPs are set right now, I find myself getting 1 or 2 running backs in the first 3 rounds and trying to get one of those elite tight ends in the first 3 rounds, and then absolutely hammering wide receiver from rounds 4 to round 7 or 8. You can get so many great values in there, and we'll probably talk about some of them coming up here, but that tends to be my build, which allows me to get that elite tight end and not feel like I'm missing out that much. And it's really because there are so many great wide receivers in the middle rounds and those rounds that I highlighted. So that's the thing for me. Now, Waller and Kittle, it pains me to say this because I really like these guys. These are guys I've been drafting for the last several years, but I don't think they belong in that elite class anymore. And it really just comes down to volume and target competition. In the years where they were putting up these monster stats, we're not questioning the talent at all. Both those guys, if they're given the volume, are elite tight ends. But this year, their situations have changed. And now we have Deebo Samuel on the 49ers. You have Brandon Ayuk ready to break out here. They have some other weapons that can command a pretty big target share. And when you look at Waller, well, guess who showed up this year? Devontae Adams now, who's like the ultimate target hog. And they have Hunter Renfrow, who's probably going to be pretty significantly involved still. So I think looking at both those guys, they're going to take a bit of a step back. I still have them in my top 5, so it's not like I'm dropping them outside of the top 10 or anything crazy. I just think they're going to be a tier below those other guys.
Dérick?
So, following your article about risky picks that could be worth it, which running backs do you think are the riskiest to choose, but at the same time is the most likely to be rewarding for this season?
Alvin Kamara was on this list for a while, but I feel like now that risk is kind of going away. Like the reason that his ADP was down into like the 3rd, sometimes even the 4th round was just because he had these off-field issues hanging over him. There's a criminal case and people were worried that he was going to get suspended, but the criminal case keeps getting backed up. And basically every legal analyst, even some of the national reporters like Adam Schefter have come out and said that he's probably not going to get suspended this year. And we've seen his ADP start to creep back up. So while there was some risk there, I'm happy to take him in the 2nd round as a guy that could be a top 5 running back, easily a 1st round value. Even with all the other options they have in that offense, I think if he loses anything, he probably won't get 80 catches anymore. He doesn't have Drew Brees dumping the ball down to him anymore, but they have a lot of other weapons in that offense. They could be pretty potent still. We know he scores a ton of touchdowns, has 5-6 touchdown upside in a single game. We've seen him do it before. So he's a guy that I'm really targeting, and I took a ton of when he was in the 3rd and 4th round, and I'm really happy with those best ball teams now. Cordero Patterson is somebody that I don't get why everyone's forgetting about him. He has fallen so far down draft boards, and okay, he did it over 30, only has one season. Maybe you think it's just an outlier, an aberration that he had that one big campaign last year. But he finished as a top 20 fantasy back and fantasy points per game. And if you just take before he got hurt, like at the end of the season, they sort of reduced his workload. Before he got hurt, he was the RB10 through the first 12 games of the season. Now, I'm not suggesting he's going to do that again, but it's not impossible that he could come out and do something like that. Regardless, I think he's a pretty strong RB2 for however long he's going to be out on the field. So even if it is only 6-8 games and then he gets banged up and they work in other guys and we see something similar happen to what happened last year, I will gladly take that value for where you can get him right now, which is outside the top 100 picks. Like in the Scott Fishbowl, I took him as my RB2, and then I loaded up on some other running backs later, like Darrell Henderson, who has a lot of upside there, Dameon Pierce, who we talked about. Got those guys later to hopefully later in the season take over if Patterson drops off. So he would be another one. And then another guy, Chase Edmonds, is somebody that also kind of a sleeper, but his ADP started to creep up a little bit to the point where I've moved him into the breakout category. Just a guy that people are worried, haven't seen him do it before. He was with the Cardinals and he was splitting time with James Robinson. Some people thought last year he was going to break out in that offense. And James Conner, not James Robinson. James Conner took over there. Now we're looking at it, and he is the guy in Miami. They paid him that way. He got a significantly bigger contract than Raheem Mostert and Sony Michel. Raheem Mostert, we know his durability concerns. Is he going to be able to stay healthy at any point? I'm not sure if he's going to be ready for week 1 or if he's going to be limited in week 1. And so it really right now, it looks like Edmonds is going to be the lead back in what we think is going to be a potent offense with our guy Tyreek Hill there now. They've improved the offensive line with Terron Armstead at left tackle. They have, I think, a better coaching staff with Mike McDaniel there now. And Edmonds is the only one that profiles as a pass catching back in that backfield. So really, he's got a lot of ways to pay off, and you can also still get him pretty cheap in drafts at the moment. So I think those are some guys that have a little bit of risk who I also think are going to have pretty big reward for people, and maybe shocking reward based on where a couple of them are going.
Perfect. So going to chat, continue with the whole running back team. We have a question from Victor. So he's probably doing a draft right now. So we need to know CMC or Eckler for pick 2, or even Taylor. I mean, at least for me, if you have Taylor there, I would go for him. But feel free to say your opinion on this.
I'm curious what draft would have all three of those guys available, because it makes me think it's super flex and maybe quarterback should be the pivot there. But if you are choosing between those three, regardless of where you're picking, I'm taking Christian McCaffrey. And I'm kind of surprised that everyone's not on the McCaffrey train. I know only played 10 games the last 2 seasons. People are worried he's going to get banged up again. He's only 26 years old right now. And I don't think that we can predict injuries very well. For example, we talked about this on my show today, but for example, what happened in the Seahawks backfield recently? Rashad Penny was hurt. Everyone was saying, oh my God, Kenneth Walker, the rookie, is going to explode now. Penny's already banged up, has all these durability concerns. A couple days later, it's Walker who actually undergoes surgery when he gets hurt. Penny returns, and now Rashad Penny's set up to potentially have a pretty good start to the year and maybe take a hold of that job this season. And we'll see if Walker can get back out there, because we don't know when he's coming back at this point. So my point is just, it's very hard to predict injuries. We have some great analysts in the industry. They say the exact same thing. We don't know. There are certain situations where maybe you have an inkling that a guy's at higher risk, but even then, it's not, we can't do with any sort of certainty. So right now, to suggest that Christian McCaffrey is going to get hurt again, I think that's a little foolish. I think it's a little presumptuous as well. What I want to do, and I kind of touched on it when I was talking about Patterson, if I can get a guy like Patterson to give me half a season even, I'll take it. And then I'll figure out the rest of the way. Well, CMC, no one has the kind of ceiling that Christian McCaffrey has. Christian McCaffrey in 2019 averaged 29.5 fantasy points per game. The next year comes back. He got hurt, but before he got hurt, averaged 30.1 fantasy points per game. And this is PPR we're talking about. Last season, Jonathan Taylor, great year, monster year, 22 fantasy points per game. In those years when CMC did that, he was 9 points ahead of everyone the first year, 5 points ahead of everyone the second year. Like, that's the gap. When he is at his best, that is the gap. Now, you want to make an argument for Eckler? Sure. I don't think he has quite the same ceiling as those guys, but also they've often used other backs with him. So there's often been someone else. Right now might be Joshua Kelly. Seems like Joshua Kelly's the number 2. We thought it was going to be Isaiah Spiller, but he's dealing with an ankle issue, and he was running behind Kelly and Larry Roundtree in the preseason. So it might take Spiller a little while before he gets up there. And Taylor also has some concerns that Nyheim Hines, everything they're saying out of Indy, is that Nyheim Hines is going to be really involved, and that Matt Ryan's the type of quarterback that will take that check down. Whereas Carson Wentz last year, we know famously, doesn't really throw to his backs that much. So those are some of my concerns. All these guys are going to be great picks. There's really no bad option there, but I would rank them CMC for the ceiling, then Jonathan Taylor, and then Eckler.
Perfect. Continue with questions. We have a question regarding Jameson Crowder. Won't win this battle with Isaiah McKenzie. So what do you think? They
no
set in stone, or
yeah, all signs seem to point to McKenzie being the guy there. Like I said earlier, I think he's the more explosive option, and from what we're hearing out of the beat writers and everything, it's that McKenzie is by far in the lead there at this point, with the rookie Khalil Shakir playing very well, and Shakir being a guy that maybe could play in the slot, maybe could play outside. I wonder if Crowder even makes the team at this point. Now, the Bills are a Super Bowl contender. They probably want the depth. They're probably going to keep him, but if they could trade him for a pick, maybe a receiver needy team out there looking for a veteran guy like Crowder, I wouldn't be that shocked if they move him at this point, because McKenzie, by all accounts, has really established himself as the guy there.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Justin. Yeah, let's dive a little bit more into this early round one, these premium picks. In your latest full PPR rankings, we see something many can presume as a hot take, but is being continually made by the sharpest fantasy analysts. Exactly the fact that you have McCaffrey number 1 overall over Jonathan Taylor, who is number 4 for you. You also have the top tier wide receivers in the top 5 overall. Kupp at 2, Jefferson at 3, and Chase at 5. Can you please tell us why CMC is ahead of Taylor? I think you already did.
I think that one we hit.
Yeah. And also why you are so bullish on the elite receivers, ranking them over running backs like Eckler, Henry, and Taylor himself.
Taylor, if I remember correctly, I think I have 2. I think I have Kupp and I think I have Jefferson ahead of Taylor. Okay. And then I have Jamar Chase behind him. But I really like all those receivers, and we can kind of tie it all together with what I was saying about Eckler. And Derrick Henry's another one where he's 28 years old. He's a big back coming off a foot injury. I just have some concerns there. Now, once again, we can't really predict injury, but as the age starts to creep up, he's 2 years older than McCaffrey, and a much different build. A really big guy like that with a foot injury, to me, that's a bit of a red flag. But we'll see. Derrick Henry has proven me wrong before. The guy might just be an alien, and he might continue to produce for the next 5 years. Who knows? He's just outstanding when it comes to real-life football and fantasy football. But for me, in PPR specifically, I like the security of those top receivers, and we can easily go through them. I mean, Cooper Kupp, when there's a record-setting season last year. You have Justin Jefferson, the new coaching staff coming in and potentially really taking that offense to another level. They're talking about being more modern, more pass heavy. All those things are going to favor Justin Jefferson, and this guy is still so young. We have not seen the best from him. That kind of goes for Chase as well. 81 catches last year, over 1,400 yards, 13 touchdowns as a rookie. Wasn't that shocking, just because the type of prospect he was coming out, one of the best receiver prospects we've ever seen. But to put up those numbers, you still don't expect that kind of production. So again, might not be the best that we've seen from him. He's so young. He could grow and develop, and that offense is going to be fantastic attached to Joe Burrow. Unless there's some sort of injury, I'm not really worried about any of those receivers, where I can look at a guy like Taylor and say, okay, 22 fantasy points per game in PPR last year. Cooper Kupp was up around 26 fantasy points per game. I would imagine Jefferson will move up in the points per game this year and move ahead of somebody like Taylor as well. So I wouldn't even be shocked if Jefferson ends up as the number one receiver overall. I know some people have already done that in their rankings and moved him ahead of Kupp just because the concerns about Matthew Stafford's elbow. But for me, I still have Kupp up there. I think that the Rams, from what they're showing us right now, they're not overly concerned about Stafford's elbow. We'll see come week 8, week 12, if I'm still feeling the same way about it. But right now, I think those top end receivers just offer more security in PPR leagues than some of those high end running backs.
We sure hope for the health of Stafford, because he's our QB1 in the Dynasty World Cup.
True.
Yeah. let's keep an eye on that. Well, Justin, still talking about your PPR rankings, we see you have some significant differences compared to consensus among top 15 running backs, as you're very high on guys like DeAndre Swift, Aaron Jones, and James Conner, and low on guys like Derrick Henry, Joe Mixon, and Najee Harris. Can you please comment on some of those names and their rankings, please?
Yeah. DeAndre Swift is somebody that from what I saw last year, I think he could have had the breakout last year. He just got hurt late in the season. Like, if you look at what he did last season, finishes the RB12 in average fantasy points per game in half PPR, RB10 in full PPR. You guys seem to prefer full PPR, so we can go with those numbers. But if we take off, he came back for a couple games at the end of the year, and they really didn't give him a full workload. They weren't playing for anything. Why risk it? Why have your star back get hurt again? So they really didn't give him that many touches. If we just look at week 1 to week 11, he played 10 games in that stretch. He was the RB7 in full PPR in average points per game. He was already on the cusp of putting up that monster season. In those 10 games, he was averaging 5.3 receptions per game. If he had stayed healthy for a full 17-game season, that would have put him around the 90 catch mark. That is an outstanding number for a running back. I think people really overreact to the Jamal Williams stuff. There was a handful of games where they played together last year where they were both healthy. I think there was 4 or 5 games, and Swift had significantly bigger stats, significantly more snaps. I'm not that worried. I think people are overreacting to the Jamal Williams thing, and they're seeing him on Hard Knocks, and they're getting all excited because he's got a great personality, really funny guy. But when it comes down to it, they're going to want to put their best players on the field. And Swift is maybe the best playmaker in that offense behind a top 3 offensive line. And we could debate the depth a little bit. They don't have a lot of depth. If somebody gets hurt, we've seen that happen last year. Somebody gets hurt, and all of a sudden the effectiveness drops off a little bit. But their front 5, their starting 5 blockers, they are up there with anyone in the league. So he is playing behind that. And we've seen it in the preseason. They're blowing other defensive lines. They're just blowing them off the ball. So I'm really excited to see what Swift can do behind them. Aaron Jones really set up for a good year with the Devontae Adams situation where he's leaving. And I know the splits by now. Everybody's probably heard them. People have talked about them all off season long, that when Adams has been out, Jones has gotten a ton of targets. I expect that to continue. Maybe not to the level we've seen in some of those games in the past. That might have just been out of necessity. But I think he is going to get a little more volume in the passing game this year. And they're going to try to run both these backs quite a bit. I think people are worried that A.J. Dillon might eat into Aaron Jones stats. But think back when Jamal Williams was there, the way that they used them, it was Aaron Jones getting a couple series, Jamal Williams getting a series. And I'd be so angry as an Aaron Jones manager sitting there going, why is Jamal Williams out there? Aaron Jones is so much better when he has the ball in his hands, and you can see it every drive. But that's just kind of how they were using them and continuously doing it. I think we'll probably see something similar where Dillon is getting worked in quite a bit. He's getting his own series, but Jones was able to put up big seasons, top 5 seasons, while splitting time with Jamal Williams. And he's going to be able to put up a top 10 season. That's how I have him ranked, splitting time with Dillon, based on the fact that I think they're really going to run that offense around the backs quite a bit because they don't have the star receiver anymore. James Conner, we saw last season, the guy in those games when Edmonds missed, there was 4 games in there, 4 or 5 games where he missed. During that time, Conner was the RB2 behind only Jonathan Taylor in fantasy points per game, was up averaging over 25 fantasy points per game. So I think now this season with Edmonds out of the way, they're going to have to lean on the run game quite a bit early in the season with DeAndre Hopkins out. Connor's set up not to be the second running back overall, but right now I have him ranked as a low-end RB1. I think that's a nice safe ranking, and I think that's where he belongs. Now, as far as the guys, who did you say here? I got to look at the show notes quick for
it's
guys
Harris,
that I wasn't.
Henry, and Mixon.
So Henry, we already talked about. Mixon,
Yeah.
I don't think I'm that low on. I'm kind of surprised that you would mention him. I have him ranked as a top 8, top 10 back. He's in that range. I can't be that far off on him, I would imagine. I think he's going to have a great year. They've upgraded that offensive line quite a bit. I like him. Now, maybe some touchdown regression coming potentially. Last year scoring 16 touchdowns. But overall, I still like Mixon. I'm more than happy to take him in the second round, even the early second round, depending on my build. Najee Harris, last year, he was a volume play. I don't think the talent is there to put him on the same level as some of the other elite backs in the league. I think he just stepped into a situation where it's an offense that loves to feature one guy, or at least they have in the past, and they gave him everything he could handle. 381 touches, led the league last year in touches, and also that was the most touches a rookie has had since 2001. Like, it's just surprising that he got that much work. Do we think that he's going to get that much work again? I'm a little bit skeptical. I talked about that offensive line not being that great. That could be a problem for him. Ben Roethlisberger not being there and maybe not getting all those little dump offs that Ben was throwing to him. Like, would he have 74 catches last year, something like that? I don't think he's going to see that again. So that's why I'm worried about him a little bit. I think that bumps him down a little bit in that offense. And yeah, Henry, we had already talked about. My concerns are kind of about the foot and maybe foolish, but as these backs get a little bit older, especially a little bit older around that 28 mark, he turns 29 in January, I believe, and has some of these injuries. That's when I start to get my spidey senses start going. I start getting a little worried.
Perfect. Diving a little bit into quarterback now, Justin. What's the ceiling for Trey Lance? Is he your QB9 right now? But do you believe he can have a second year full of breakout like Mahomes and Lamar have done? Or something closer
ahead,
to something more like Jalen Hurts kind of season?
This year specifically, we're probably looking at something more like what Jalen Hurts did last year. Something more, could be a top 6 or 7 fantasy quarterback. He's going to have some bumps. He's going to make some silly plays. He's going to throw some bad interceptions. This is his first chance to start over a long stretch, over a full season. He's going to make mistakes. There's going to be issues along the way. Now, fantasy-wise, he's still going to be great because he's going to be running the ball a lot. We saw that last year. In the 3 games where he played at least 50% of the snaps, 2 of those games, he was a top 13 weekly fantasy finisher among quarterbacks. So that's the kind of upside. Even when he wasn't completely prepared, even when he was out there a little dinged up and had the finger injury, he was still producing for fantasy. So we're going to see great things from him. Now, you're going to get me in trouble talking about a ceiling, because when I think of his ceiling, if everything goes right, and it might not happen this year, this might be a year or 2 from now in his career, but if everything goes right for him, he has the same kind of skill set as a guy like Josh Allen. And I know that's blasphemy as a Bills fan for me to say that, but when you think about the way they treated Allen and how they kind of developed him, he came into the league, had the big arm, had the rushing ability, and his accuracy was a big concern. His touch on some of those short passes, a big concern. And they brought him along slowly, and they got him the weapons like Stephon Diggs, and they built it up, and they built him up, and they really built the offense around him. And he emerged as this fantastic quarterback, the best quarterback in the league. When you look at Lance, he already has a great set of skill position players, one of the best sets of skill position players around him. There's some concerns on the offensive line, especially in the interior there. I mean, it helps having, Trent Williams, an absolute all-pro at left tackle. We'll see if Mike McGlinchey can come through at right tackle. And then they're going to have to figure it out in the middle of that line. So that is a little bit concerning if he's getting a lot of pressure up the middle. But just based on the fact that he has these yak monsters in Kittle and Ayuk and Debo, these guys that he doesn't have to do all the work. He can throw it short and let them pick up the yards on their own. And we've already seen it this preseason, and we saw it last year in the preseason as well. Lance, unlike Jimmy Garoppolo, is not afraid to take shots downfield. He will be aggressive. He'll use that big arm. He found Danny Gray for a 76-yard touchdown in the first preseason game this year. We're going to see a lot of that as well, and he's got the weapons to do that, including the rookie Danny Gray, who's a real speedster, a real field stretcher, and he'll get out there this season too. So all the pieces are in place, including a great coaching staff and a really good system around him. It's all there. The rushing ability will help him be good for fantasy right away. So this season, I want to remain kind of realistic right now. I keep kind of flip-flopping him around that QB8, QB9 range. I think he'll probably finish top 6, top 7 potentially. But really, if everything goes well this season, it would not shock me if he was top 5 or even top 3, just because the rushing ability is so strong. Like he could end up putting up the kind of rushing stats almost like a Lamar, maybe not quite all the way to what Lamar's done and over 1,000 rushing yards, but he has that kind of upside rushing.
Perfect.
Awesome.
Another question, this time for myself.
Okay.
What do you think about Derek Carr this year with these new weapons and the whole Vegas offense?
Yeah, Derek Carr, I want to move him up higher. I would like to move him up higher. I think he's a nice late round option that you can get in most leagues. Some leagues he's crept up a little bit in ADP, but you can often get him as a late round quarterback. The thing with guys like him, guys like Kirk Cousins, who I think could have a pretty good year, Tua Tagovailoa, there's a bunch of guys in that range that I think could all be really good, high-end QB2s, maybe even sneak into the low-end QB1 range. The only problem is this year we have 10, 12 really strong quarterbacks, guys that I think have a shot to be a top 5 quarterback this season. And the back end of that is, Russell Wilson and Trey Lance and Dak Prescott, Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers, like all those guys could have fantastic seasons and put up big stats. Aaron Rodgers, maybe a little tougher for him, but we've seen him, even in the games when Devontae Adams wasn't out there, we've seen him continue to produce. So when you look at some of these guys like a Carr, like a Cousins, like Tua, as much as I want to move them up, it's really difficult to crack that top 12 at this point. So I like them. I think it shows us that quarterback is incredibly deep. I think Carr having his college buddy and Devontae Adams there, the fact that they already have some chemistry together, I think that is really good for both of them. And it makes that kind of that bond, that transition over a much, much easier situation now, whereas you don't have to have a guy going to a new team. He doesn't know the quarterback. He has to figure out how he throws the ball, all that sort of stuff. Now, they already have that rapport. So that's great. And I think that's going to help elevate the entire offense. When you bump everybody else down a peg, when you take a Hunter Renfrow, now he doesn't have to be the number 1 receiver. And you take a Darren Waller, and now he can just be a really good pass catching tight end. He doesn't have to go up against, the top defensive players on the other team every week. That's going to help everyone. It's going to help Carr. So I like him this season. It's just, for me, I tend to come away with one of those top 12 guys this year, which is easy. I mean, as long as you don't let anybody get a backup before you get your starter, you're going to be able to get one of the top 12. And that's what I want to do this season. I'm not really diving in any deeper to the quarterback position any later. I want to make sure I get one of those high-end guys. And for me, it normally ends at that Russell Wilson, Trey Lance kind of spot inside the top 10.
Perfect. Thank you.
Perfect. Yeah, we have already talked about Pierce a little bit, but in our chat, Fantasy Futebolista Guilherme Gianni is asking you if he's the real deal.
It's a tough projection because in college, I'm sure you guys have looked at it. He had very limited stats in college, and you can blame that on the coaching staff. You can really blame it on anything you want. But normally when guys have limited college stats, it makes it harder to project them to be a real star in the pros. But everything we've seen so far, very, very positive. So yes, I think Pierce could be as an early down back, as a guy that is explosive, has some big playability. I do think that he can come through. But once again, I have to express some caution, like we talked about before, that his situation this year, they're probably going to be trailing quite a bit. And that might lead to those veteran guys getting a little more work in that passing game, as opposed to Pierce being out there with those early down runs. So just be cautious. It's really going to come down to how good the Texans are this year, if they can stay competitive. And I think, right now for Pierce, I have him inside of my top 40, and he continues to creep up. So I like him, but I still only like him in that RB3 kind of range at the moment. I'm not going crazy with it.
Nice. Let's talk a little bit more about the Bills. As a diehard Bills fan that you are, Justin, it's inevitable for us to ask about the players on your team, especially the backfield that have seen a late resurgence from Devin Singletary down the stretch last year, added a very good pass catcher on the second round of the NFL draft, and now have rumors about good showings from Zach Moss in training camp. How do you see the situation? And are you pursuing one or more of these running backs? Also about the Bills, we at Brasil Fantasy Football strongly believe in Diggs as the wide receiver 4 overall. In the other hand, you have Adams ahead of him in your rankings. Why is that? Why do you prefer Adams over Diggs?
You guys pack so much into all of these questions. It's my third podcast of the day, guys. My God.
Sorry, man.
So at first I'll say you made me realize how foolish that I'm not drinking out of my Bills mug right now. I should have been doing that. That was what a mistake by me. So we'll start with the receivers because I think we can go through that one pretty quick. I've talked about this before, but I don't spend a lot of time. I don't spend as much time differentiating between something like that, like Devontae Adams and Stephon Diggs, having them wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5. Their projections are incredibly close for me. Like I could flip-flop them probably every time I do my ranking. So it's very, very close. So I don't have a strong feeling one way or the other. I normally want to spend more of my time a little bit deeper down the rankings, right? Trying to figure out some of those differences, the guys who are going to be the breakouts, the sleepers, some of the guys in that range, because I feel like near the top, pretty much all of those picks are strong picks. They're up there for a reason. And a lot of the guys that end up busting in that range, it's because of injuries, right? And not a lot of guys in those, and there are some every year, but it's not like you're going to see a half a dozen guys bust in that range because they're all terrible football players. They're all going to be able to produce. They'll get banged up. They'll miss some time. Their numbers won't be as good. That tends to be the reason. So I still like both these guys. I think Adams has a better chance to get really that monster target share. And that's the reason why I have him a little higher. I think for Diggs, now that Buffalo has all these weapons, I'm not just saying a Gabe Davis. I'm not just saying Isaiah McKenzie we talked about, but Dawson Knox is there to take a little bit away. Some of those other guys, if Jamison Crowder stays, if Khalil Shakir gets involved, you could have a fourth receiver. And we've seen it before when McKenzie was the fourth receiver. He would get out there and get some touches and some targets every game. And you have in the backfield now James Cook, and clearly they wanted to bring in a running back that could be more involved and more explosive in the passing game because they tried to sign J.D. McKissick, and we know that didn't work. And then they tried to get Chase Edmonds reportedly as well in the offseason. And in the end, they end up drafting Cook, and I think he's going to be a very good player for them, but another guy that's going to take some targets away. So for me, that I just think there's a lot more guys in the Bills offense that they're going to spread it around. They're going to take what the defense gives them. Josh Allen is very smart at that at this point, and that's the only reason. And it's really, we're splitting hairs with those guys at the top. In the backfield, really interesting to see the usage this week because I was looking at it saying, okay, Devin Singletary, fantastic down the stretch last year. I think he was a top 5 fantasy running back over the last 5 games. Great. Volume based though. Really did it on volume. He's got some talent, don't get me wrong, but he really did it on volume last year. And now when you bring in a James Cook, who maybe could be that more explosive guy, who maybe could turn into an Alvin Kamara light in a really effective offense, I thought Cook should have been the guy that was going first. And I had them ranked very close, but I had Cook a little bit higher. In my update now, I'm actually going to move Singletary back above him. And it's because this week we saw Singletary came out and played all 10 snaps with the starters on that first drive. He was out there the entire time. And then Cook only came in after Zach Moss actually came in second. And I don't think that's the order. I think it's just a matter of the specific plays. And Moss, like you mentioned, could be a goal line guy. He'll get some work in there. And they seem to like what he's doing this offseason. I never know if that stuff's true or not. When you're talking about guys deeper down the depth chart, I always wonder if they put those reports out just to see if they could get anything for them on the trade market, right? I don't know that Zach Moss would really command much on the trade market, but I also don't know that he's going to have a really big role in this offense. He could be a goal line vulture, but there's already a goal line vulture there in Josh Allen. So for me, I'm looking at it right now going Singletary seems to be the clear lead back entering the season. He will get the most snaps with that offense. And I think he will still have a shot at scoring some touchdowns. Late in the season last year, he was scoring touchdowns, even though Josh Allen's there to vulture some stuff. Singletary was finding the end zone. So I think he'll be able to continue that just with Cook coming in and taking on the pass catching role as a more dynamic, explosive element. And it's great. He had an awesome game this week as well. Had 50 yards from scrimmage on 5 touches. Singletary, I think, was around 38 or 40 yards, if I remember correctly, on 5 touches. So they both played really well this week. It was great to see. And in an offense like this, they know they're going for a Super Bowl. They want to try to keep these guys healthy. And I think that's what they're going to do. They're mix and match a little bit this year more. Singletary, to me, has the slight edge for fantasy, just because I think he is going to be the lead back and get the most work. Cook, probably he's not a great runner between the tackles. That's really the the knock on him. Very explosive on the outside, very explosive in the passing game when you can get him in space. But I don't know that he'll ever emerge as a guy that could be a 3-down back or anything like that. So that caps his upside. His presence caps Singletary's upside. It's an unfortunate situation. Everybody's ranked as an RB3, and not Zach Moss, but of those two. And Zach Moss is out of the picture in my mind. He would need a couple injuries, I think, before I'd really start to consider him in fantasy.
Nice, awesome. Still on the Bills, it's impossible not to discuss the polarizing Gabriel Davis. As we do that, we would like to dive into that wide receiver 24 to 40 range and all its potential. You seem to be on the optimistic side on Davis, as you have him as wide receiver 25. You really like Rashad Bateman as well, ranking him as wide receiver 24. On the other hand, we see Amon-Ra St. Brown as wide receiver 32. Why are you lower on him relative to consensus and like those other guys significantly more? What other receivers ranked between 24 to 40 have the higher ceilings and can finish as a top 15 player at the position? It's that range that you said that you are hammering receivers, I think, right?
Yeah, there's so many guys in that range. We could spend a whole episode talking about just that range of wide receiver and how difficult it is to rank those guys right now. It is incredibly tough to kind of split between them. Talking about Davis first, people are concerned, I guess, because he couldn't beat out Emmanuel Sanders last year. And the funny thing actually about Davis is you might think I'm high on Davis having him as wide receiver 25. Last time I looked at Underdog ADP, and it's pretty sharp. Normally, Underdog's kind of telling you where regular ADP is going to end up soon. Underdog ADP, he's wide receiver 19 right now. Like, it is getting crazy out there. So you look at that, you think I was actually low on him. I really like him. When you look at what he did last year in those games, once he got out there in the games where he played over 50% of the snaps, he averaged 59 yards per contest and had 4 touchdowns in those games. So that was 6 contests that he was able to do that. And that's not even counting the big playoff performance, the 200-yard, 4-touchdown game. What I'm looking for from Davis is not even necessarily big yardage. He might not even crack 1,000 yards this year, but he's going to have that big touchdown total. 900 yards, might see double-digit touchdowns this year. I think he's going to be a really strong wide receiver too. Rashad Bateman, somebody that is going to be in this condensed passing game in Baltimore, really going to step up. I liked him before they got rid of Marquise Brown. Now with Marquise Brown gone, there's no one stopping him from being the top receiver there. Mark Andrews, as we talked about, sort of the de facto number 1 receiver at tight end. But Bateman profiled as a wide receiver 1 coming out. Last year, started the year on injured reserve, had this kind of weird rookie season where he came in and he was hurt and then he showed up. And in 3 of his first 4 games, he topped 50 yards. And then Lamar Jackson gets hurt late in the year and he sort of just makes it to the end. He had one big game where he had over 100 yards and kind of flashed some of that number 1 potential. But I like the fact that while he was on the field, commanded a 21% target share as a rookie. Really, he was showing us, and I think it comes down to, for him, he's a guy where you're seeing high-end talent and the opportunity all kind of come together for him. And we just hope that that passing attack will be able to give him enough volume. I think it will, in order to put up some good stats, and that Lamar Jackson's going to stay healthy. Please, Lamar Jackson, we need you to stay healthy this season. So that's a big one. Amon-Ra St. Brown, I want to have him high. I've ended up with him a lot of places. I took him in Scott Fishbowl. So it's another one where it's not that I'm down on the player. I worry a little bit that he'll be overdrafted based on the fact that last year, those big numbers he was putting up down the stretch, those were coming when pretty much everybody else on the offense was hurt. Now you have DeAndre Swift back and TJ Hawkinson back, and they signed DJ Shark. A lot of other options now out there with him. It's going to bump him down a bit. So I see him last year. No one thought he was going to put up wide receiver 1 numbers this season, I don't think. But this year I see him more as that wide receiver 3 as opposed to a wide receiver 1 when he was getting double-digit targets in basically every game down the stretch. He was averaging double-digit targets. So that's one. And then in this range, I mean, I got to pull up my rankings here because there are so many guys I could rattle off. I mean, you look at Darnell Mooney, I absolutely love. Another guy, talent, volume coming for him. Brandon Cooks, Allen Robinson, Adam Thielen, Brandon Ayuk, Elijah Moore, Jerry Jeudy. I'm going to lose my voice saying all these guys. Chris Godwin, Drake London, even Robert Woods, Christian Kirk. All those guys could get up into that range. So I mentioned it before. I will say it again. Make sure that you're coming away with at least 2 of those guys in those sort of middle rounds, round 4 to round 7 or 8. probably more. I probably want to come away with 3, maybe even 4, maybe just focus on receiver entirely and avoid some of the landmines that there could be at some of the other positions, avoid paying up for quarterback, avoid some of the tight ends like a George Kittle or a Waller who aren't going to give you that ceiling that they gave you in years past. And some of the dead zone running backs, you just kind of get away from all that. You avoid that risk. You hit on these receivers. Some of the guys are breakouts, some of the guys that are veterans that are still getting it done. Adam Thielen's somebody that for the last 5 years, when he's been out there for the last 5 years, he's averaged wide receiver 1 fantasy stats. He's been hurt 2 of the last 3 seasons. He is definitely getting up there in age, but if he can stay healthy for however long he stays healthy, another one of those guys, give me half a season, Adam Thielen, half a season as a wide receiver 1, I will take it, and I will find another receiver to play in the second half of the year. He's one of those guys that could still give you really high-end numbers, even though people are a little bit down on him because of the age and the injuries.
Yeah, we really hope so for Team Brazil as well. Now, Dérick,
you traded a second-round rookie pick for him. That was a great trade for you guys.
Yeah, for our strategy, I think it makes sense.
Right. So, talking about quarterbacks again, you have Kyler Murray as your QB7, outside the top 5. Sorry. What are the main reasons for that? And is one of them the injury risk he showcased as we have seen the disproportion between his number in the first half of the season and compared to the second half? So I believe for the beginning start, I'll let you breathe a little bit and then you continue the rest of the questions.
All right, sounds good. We're breaking up a little bit here. Well, one at a time. All right, good. I appreciate that. For Kyler, there's a few things. The fact that he's not going to have DeAndre Hopkins for the first 6 games, I don't feel like people are talking about that enough. I know they went out and they got one of his buddies in Marquise Hollywood Brown, and that'll help a little bit, but a much different receiver than Hopkins, right? Hopkins, that true number 1, that big body in the end zone. We've seen Hopkins make countless plays for him, jump balls, contested catches. Marquise Brown, more that speedster, stretch in the field, just a different type of receiver. So that's going to change the offense a little bit there. They're losing Christian Kirk. Can Rondale Moore step up into that role? Maybe, but not for sure. The way they used Rondale Moore last year, I don't know what he's going to be in their offense this season. So some concerns along those lines. And then, just all the red flags, whatever it is, whether it's the weirdness with the organization, whether it's the second half of the season, the numbers dropping off. I know some people want to blame it on his video game playing. I'm not going that far. I think it's more along the lines of what you're talking about, where he's a smaller quarterback, gets banged up as the year goes along, and his production isn't the same. He's not running as much, and the numbers fall off a little bit there. But it's another one where all those quarterbacks at the top, especially right at the top, trying to differentiate between them is so difficult. And I just feel a little bit more confident in some of those other guys versus Murray, to me, is really the one in that first group of however many you want to say, 6 or 7, where he's the first one that has some significant red flags compared to the other guys that seem much safer in my mind.
Perfect. Still on this matter, is injury concern also the reason why you have Stafford outside the top 12?
Yeah. Stafford, I really like those top 12, like we talked about before. And Stafford, I think he's going to be okay. I was a little more worried initially when this came out, but then seeing him throw at practice and seeing them not bring in anyone else, not bring in a real veteran quarterback that could back him up, somebody that they might have a little more faith in, that tells me that they're not that worried about it. Now, could they be absolutely foolish about this and they have the rose-colored glasses on and they're just hoping he's going to be fine, and then in week 8, that arm falls off? That could be a big problem. But the other thing is, when you're talking about an arm injury and it's an elbow injury, this is a guy that's going to give you nothing with his legs. And nowadays, everybody wants the dual threat quarterbacks. That helps lift the floor. We talked about it with Lance. Stafford gives you nothing with his legs. And that doesn't mean that he can't put up a big fantasy season. We've seen guys like him and Tom Brady. They have the yardage, they have the touchdowns, and they get themselves up into the top half of the QB1 range. Now, last year, Stafford finished as QB5 overall. That was total for the year. If you look at his points per game, he was QB11 on the season. And so now we're taking the quarterback that was QB11. We're shaking things up a little bit in his offense. He's losing his left tackle and Andrew Whitworth, who was a stud there for a while. He has everybody sounds really hyped about Allen Robinson there, but some changes now with Allen Robinson in and Robert Woods, Odell Beckham out. Yeah, Van Jefferson's going to be hurt early in the season. You have Tyler Higbee coming back from an injury. I think he's going to be okay for week 1, but Higbee coming back from an injury as well. Things have changed a little bit. And now if you have this elbow injury and a guy that absolutely needs to put up monster stats with his arm in order to get up into that difference making, top 7, top 8 range for quarterbacks, what happens even if the arm doesn't become a problem where he has to sit out, but just if he starts to lose a little power, if he's not throwing for as many yards, if they start to lean on the run a little more because Stafford's ailing and in pain a little bit, there's a lot of situations where it could go south for him, and maybe not completely take him out of the mix, but take him out of the mix enough that he's not going to be in that QB1 conversation for me this year.
Perfect. How do you measure the health situation when rank some important fantasy players such as Chris Godwin, Cam Akers, James Robinson, and Michael Gallup, and also put Saquon Barkley too?
I mean, I am no injury expert. I mentioned before, there's a lot of great ones in the industry. Gene Bramall at Football Guys, Edwin Porras at Fantasy Points, Matthew Betts, Stephania Bell. There's a lot. I'm forgetting some. Forgive me. I'm sorry. But I look at, there are probably 8 to 10 different injury analysts who I kind of look at their stuff and I try to see if I can gauge a consensus. I put that together with what I know from covering the NFL and from playing fantasy for so many years. You start to get a feel, but also these things are constantly changing. We're seeing guys come back earlier from injuries. So you have to stay on top of it all. You have to try to take in as much news as you possibly can from the injury analysts, from what the teams are saying about these players, and just kind of put it all together. And it's case by case. There is no clear answer. I know everybody wants it to be black and white and a 1 and a 0, and there's just one path that you take and it solves everything. But that's just not the way it goes in fantasy. And it's definitely not the way it goes with these injuries. So for me, I have to look at each one individually and go from there. And I really rely on those names that I mentioned before and those people. I think everybody should be following them.
Perfect.
Nice, Justin. To wrap things up, we have 2 last questions here from the chat. The first one from Fantasy Futebolista is asking you who can be the best wide receiver option for Mahomes this season. It's Juju, or do you have something else in mind?
As long as Juju's healthy. I'm a little bit concerned about this knee issue. He plays 1 preseason game. He has a knee issue, and now he's been sitting out. The report that we got today from Andy Reid is that he's turned the corner and he's going to be okay, and he'll be out there week 1. As long as Juju's out there, not counting Travis Kelce. Travis Kelce, another one of those guys that he's the de facto number 1 receiver in the offense. But I think Juju's going to get it done on volume. I'm not sure he's the same player that he was when he first came in the league. I think some of those injuries that he's had have kind of sapped some of that effectiveness, some of that explosiveness when he first came into the league. So now he's going to have to be that volume dependent slot guy. But we saw him able to do that in the Steelers offense, put up decent numbers, just being that guy that's going to be that safety net underneath. So I think we'll see him do that in the offense, and I think we'll see him be the top guy. If we're looking past him, it gets really, really tricky. It's probably going to be Marcus Valdes-Scantling because Sky Moore seems like he's got a little ways to go to move up the depth chart at this point. Really excited about Sky Moore's talent long-term, but this year might not be a guy that puts up big numbers in the first month or the first half of the season. So MVS is going to try to do his best Tyreek Hill impression. It is not going to be anywhere close, but as a deep threat in a Patrick Mahomes offense, and we saw with Justin Watson in the last preseason game, Mahomes can find you downfield. So MVS will have some splash games. Not somebody that I really want to have to trust in my lineup, but the stats are probably going to be there for him to be a half decent, wide receiver 4 with wide receiver 3 upside.
Nice, Justin. I really like Sky Moore, but I guess we'll have to be patient with him.
Long term, he's going to be good. It's just how long is it going to take for him to carve out a serious role in that offense?
Nice. So the last question here is from our friend Eduardo, who's coming along with the comments with Derek Carr. He says the Josh McDaniels system likes running the ball a lot. Can it disturb the production for Carr? Do you think it's a problem?
I don't see it as a problem. I think he'll still put up fine stats this year. Like I said, I'm not moving him up into any sort of like meaningful range. He's not inside my top 20 or top 120 or top 130, I don't think. And he's not inside my top 12 quarterbacks, so it's not like I'm overly excited about Carr, but no, I don't see that the Josh McDaniels system will be a problem. I think they got lots of weapons there. And we've seen McDaniels really mold to what he has, right? When they had better pass catching weapons in New England, they threw the ball quite a bit. When they needed to lean on the run, that's what they did. So I think McDaniels probably learned from his first run with the Broncos. I think he's going to come into this offense and they will run the ball, and Josh Jacobs and the running backs there. I mean, Zamir White's probably going to factor in. Amir Abdullah going to be the pass catching back now that they've released Kenyon Drake. So that might end up being just a fantasy mess, but I don't see this as a ground and pound team, especially not behind that offensive line. They're going to have to throw. That's where their best playmakers are. And Josh McDaniels is smart enough that he's going to do that. So no, I don't think that's going to be a problem for Carr.
Okay, Justin, I think we have taken so much of your time and your knowledge with all these giant questions. And we thank you once again for your presence here, for inviting us for your Dynasty League. It's always a huge pleasure to talk to you about fantasy. And I would like to, Dérick, say his last greetings to you. And thank you once again, Justin.
Thank you very much. I really learned a lot today regarding different perspectives, how you do your rankings, what you look into more specifically, and also sorry, especially when it comes to two players that are quite similar in the top, like Diggs and Adams, the accent that you gave us. You don't look a lot when it comes to that, and you like to see more who'd be the breakouts and things like that. I really learn a lot, and thank you very much for this live. And also sorry for the big questions, such as
fine, guys.
that one.
I was just kidding around. No, it's fine. It's fine. It's my memory at this point in the day, probably later in the night, trying to rattle off. Okay, what were the 10 names that we were talking about? I got to remember them all. That's more on me than on you guys. I wouldn't worry about that. But no, I love talking to you guys. Everybody from your crew is great. It's been great having you in the International Fantasy Football League. We've had some awesome trade negotiations. The thread that we have going with the group on Twitter is normally really fun. It's quieted down a little bit recently, but I'm sure it'll get going as the season kicks off here. So it's been great having you guys in the league. It was awful that you guys beat me and won the title last year. I hate that completely, but no, it's been a really fun league, and it's always fun jumping on with you guys. I appreciate so much that you guys are willing to do it in English here and able to have me on to do it that way. So hopefully your listeners get a lot out of this. I know I always have fun coming on. So anytime, you guys, let me know.
Thank you, Justin. They sure will. So I'll just leave some last message in Portuguese and wrap things up. Obrigado a todo mundo aí que participou no chat, galera. Foram muito boas as suas perguntas, a participação de vocês. Estaremos de volta semana que vem com o mock draft final aí da nossa redação do mês de agosto, para preparar aí os rankings finais de todo mundo também e ajudar vocês nas ligas que estão chegando. É isso aí, muito obrigado a todo mundo, até a próxima e aquele abraço.